Thank you. Well, it's been a long time since I've been here. Thank you. For those of you who remember me, it is delightful. And it's great to see that there are people here who I don't know and who have come and joined the congregation. It's really good to be here. I was mentioning to Katie when I saw that those of you who were here may remember that when I was here, the ceiling was falling down, and we had scaffolding. I have wonderful pictures of me preaching through the scaffolding, which moved every week. And the fun thing about the scaffolding moving every week was that every week some people had to sit in their not regular seats. And there was no one to blame or be mad at. And some people actually made new friends. So, my first reading this morning comes from an article. Golly, I'm trying to adjust this to suit me. I don't know. Just be patient a minute. We try to work it out here. I think I'm just going to have to get used to it this way. This is from it's an excerpt from an article called "It Didn't Need to Be This Way" by William Deresiewicz, and it was in the November 2021 issue of the Atlantic magazine. He writes, "The Dawn of Everything" by David Gaber and David Wengrow is a brilliant account of 30,000 years of human history. Hunter-gatherer societies were far more complex and varied than we have imagined. The authors introduce us to sumptuous Ice Age burials. The beadwork at one site alone is thought to have required 10,000 hours of work. They tell us of a hunter-gatherer metropolis the size of a Mesopotamian city-state. They describe an indigenous Amazonian society that shifted seasonally between two entirely different forms of social organization: small authoritarian nomadic bands during the dry months and large consensual horticultural settlements during the rainy season. They speak of the kingdom of Calusa, a monarchy of hunter-gatherers the Spanish found when they arrived in Florida. All of these scenarios are unthinkable within the conventional narrative. But the author's most compelling instance of urban egalitarianism is undoubtedly Teotihuacan, a Mesoamerican city that rivaled Imperial Rome, its contemporary, for size and magnificence. After sliding toward authoritarianism, its people abruptly changed course, abandoning monument building and human sacrifice for the construction of high-quality public housing. Many people enjoyed a standard of living that is rarely achieved across such a wide sector of urban society in any period in urban history, including our own. Thus ends our first reading. Something to think about. My second reading is from Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture by Yatasha Womack. She says, "Hope, much like imagination, comes at a premium. The cost is a life where more is expected. Where more is expected, new actions are required. The audacity of hope, the bold declaration to believe, and clarity of vision for a better life and world are the seeds of personal growth, revolutionized society, and life-changing technologies. Desire, hope, and imagination are the cornerstones of social change and the first targets of those who fight against it. You can't go forward with cynicism, cynicism being disbelief. You have to hope against the odds and not go backwards by fear. Dr. King, Chavez, Gandhi were people who removed people from low places and had the hope. Thus ends our second reading. I invite you to join me, but I'm going to go step away because I'm another person who doesn't sing to a microphone. But I invite you to stand as you're willing and able and sing the hymn that's in your order of service with heart and mind.
With heart and mind and voice and hand, may we this time and place transcend to make our purpose understood. A mortal search for mortal good, a firm commitment to the goal of justice, freedom, peace for all. A mind that's free to seek the truth, a mind that's free in age and youth, to choose a path no threat impedes, wherever light of conscience leads. Our martyrs die so we could be a church where every mind is free. A heart that's kind, a heart whose search makes love the spirit of our church, where we can grow and each one's gift is sanctified as spirits lift, where every door is open wide for all who choose to step inside.
You may be seated. It's good to be back. Well, as you heard, for 40 years, actually for a little over 40 years, I have been a minister. First I was a chaplain, then I was a settled minister, then I became an accredited interim minister, which was when I was serving here, and eventually I became a leave minister, filling in for ministers taking leave of absence, and now I'm doing pulpit supply. While not necessarily my intention in all those years, I have been a change agent. The first time that I stood up here in 2006 and was obviously not Thomas Michelson, you knew things were different. They had changed. We know that when things change, some people will feel more comfortable and some people will feel less. Does that change affirm your place? Does it make you wonder? Realistically, anytime you introduce new people into a community, a gathering, an organization, they change it. They may be leaders, they may be members, it's not their intent, but that's our experience. You know it from your own life. When someone new joins your book group, the dynamic changes. That new person didn't necessarily intend to change it, it just happened. When someone joins the Building and Grounds Committee or the choir, they come with questions. The questions themselves stir things up, and we can embrace or resist them. But once they've been asked, they're out there, and it's different. I've learned that lesson many times over, but one time in particular stays with me. I was the newly settled minister in a congregation, and I was very curious and eager, and I think you will learn a little naive. The church I was serving had in its bylaws that the board was responsible for the church budget. And there was nothing in the bylaws that said that the governing board had to consult or share it with the congregation, which in hundreds of years it never had. I wondered about that out loud. I said, gee, it doesn't say in the bylaws that you can't consult with the congregation. Oh, really? It might change things in the congregation if people were consulted, if there was input. Well, how would you do that? Right there in the bylaws, it says the board has full responsibility for the budget. Well, I said, some churches hold a budget hearing, and the congregation gathers, and the board or the finance committee presents the proposed budget, and the congregation gives feedback and has conversation about it. Some people like that idea. Some people thought it was a great idea, including some on the board who got about the business of organizing a budget hearing. And much to everyone's surprise, the place was packed. For the first budget hearing in hundreds of years, the congregation turned out. And there were questions, and there were suggestions, and there were ideas. All kinds of things came bubbling out, bubbling out, bubbling out. And when it was over, the congregation asked the board to go back to the drawing board and reconstruct the budget with the feedback and the priorities the congregation had just articulated in mind. It was all very civil. And so the board took the suggestions and held a very special board meeting just for the purpose of reconstructing the budget. And I was there because I was the minister ex officio at the meeting, and we sat at a huge square table, and a few hours into the evening, as they were working on trying to accommodate their sense of prudence and the congregation's sense of priorities, the treasurer, exasperated, looked across the table directly at me and said, "We never had these problems before she came along." I wanted to crawl under the table. I wanted to claim innocence. I hadn't organized the meeting. But claiming innocence would have been untruthful, because once I had publicly observed that it could be another way, the genie was out of the bottle. Someone else could run with it, and someone else did. It wasn't mine anymore. Truth-telling always contains the possibility of generating change, or sometimes, as may ultimately prove with the January 6th insurrection investigation, truth-telling may actually bring things back accountably to what was the original intent. The original intent matters. Consider, if a church is intended to be democratic, the change to a budget hearing did not change the intent, merely strengthened its practice by adding a layer of accountability and engagement. It created more of the experience they valued. Not really a change then at all. Simply a fulfillment of a promise to be democratic and inclusive that had been made implicitly a long time ago. If our country is intended to be democratic, insisting on a nonviolent transfer of power via our electoral process is not a change. The accountability strengthens the practice and the intended outcome. So what really is changed? And is it changed just because we resist it? I was pushed back on my heels by a conversation I had with my adult son not that long ago. We were talking about me preparing for my retirement, and he was pushing me. And I said, I'm really not that concerned about it. I like change. Change is what I do. I do change all the time. I'm an interim minister. I change churches every 2 years. I love change. It's what I do. No, Mom, said my son. It's not change you love. It's variety. Whoa. That really set me back on my heels. I have been thinking long and hard about that. How often do we resist what we are calling change when really it is variety, another way to get there? And how often is the change we think we are calling for really a longing for variety? I'm not talking about moving around the deck chairs on the Titanic. I'm talking about meaningful variety, like including congregational input to a budget that does not change the intent of the congregation and its purpose, or, for instance, including people with different backgrounds and different valid ideas in congregational decision-making, people who share the mission and share the values of the church, but come at it with a different perspective, a different lens, have a different take on things. They bring variety. Consider what we are learning about early human communities and civilizations. I was astounded to learn how many thousands of years of experience we have in all different locations and different climates on how we could live together. The variety in our human experience is far greater than any anthropologists ever dreamed. They were surprised, among other things, when they found complexity in hunter-gatherer societies. We heard about a monarchy in a hunter-gatherer society. And we heard about Ice Age burials where beadwork would have required 10,000 hours of work. To me, that says that there was a complex distribution of work in those hunter-gatherer cultures. Some were hunting, some were gathering, some were watching the children, some were preparing food, while the skilled bead workers crafted their art. Something different than what we thought. Another thing that really intrigued me was learning about Teotihuacan, a Mesoamerican city that rivaled imperial Rome, was of similar grandeur contemporaneous with Rome on our side of the globe? After sliding toward authoritarianism, its people abruptly changed course, abandoning monument building and human sacrifice for the construction of high-quality public housing. They just did it. Many citizens there enjoying a standard of living rarely achieved across a wide sector of urban society in any period, including our own. My. I was really taken with this learning, this additional learning, that the varieties of ways of organizing ourselves to live together are possibly infinite. And the ways they have been tried are more numerous than we even know. When we talk about the great American experiment, it is one variety among many, including many kinds of cultures that were accountable to the people. Some of them lasted hundreds and hundreds of years, and some even made the intentional decision to change themselves. It gives me hope and even optimism when I reflect on these truths. If the American experiment is continuing as a living experiment, it has the possibility of conceiving a variation that meets the intent of government of, by, and for the people better than we do now. I don't know what that might look like, what changes we might have to do, what might need to take place to achieve that better match. But this is a work in progress. And while we are doing that, we are going to make mistakes, but hopefully we will continue to make corrections. Even while we invent our future, we can glean learning and inspiration from others, it turns out, who lived long, long ago. My. I am so taken by the discovery of an indigenous Amazonian society that shifted seasonally between two entirely different forms of social organization. Small, authoritarian, nomadic bands during the dry season, and large, consensual horticultural settlements during the rainy season. That is an idea that I, for one, had never thought of, that there does not even need to be a single way for us to choose to organize as a people. It could shift situationally. Who leads, when, and how can change on purpose, intentional, without drama. Imagine that. Social media has been forcing that question of how we organize and manage ourselves upon us, as has the introduction of Zoom and the practice of gathering virtually. We are gathered here this morning, some in person and some by live stream. I can't see you all, but that doesn't mean you aren't here. You are here whether I can see you or not. So what does it mean then now for us to be together? I'm not asking you anything new. You've all lived through this change or this experience of variety. What I'm asking you to think about are the implications and opportunities For our country, yes, and even more personally for our congregations. For your congregation, First Parish in Cambridge. When we are planning together, it will now always include the decisions about how. We will never stop loving the experience of in-person contact, of being together, that kind of connection. We will always want that in our lives. But we also know that in-person meeting often excludes some people with mobility issues, health constraints, transportation access, hearing deficits. Just as staircases have kept people out of church buildings for years, so have these other barriers, which technology has offered the opportunity to eliminate. I think it is time then, as we look forward, it is time to ask, what should be the primary thing that congregational life provides for us? What should be the primary thing that congregational life provides for us? And when we know that, how will we make it possible? We have learned that people can live well together in an infinite variety of ways, on grand scales and on small scales. And we know that how we live together cannot go back to how it was before. Desire, hope, and imagination are the cornerstones of social change. Womack reminds us. We want to include everyone who wants to belong. And Womack names our tools: desire, hope, and imagination. Let us harness those tools, crafting cornerstones for our community, our country, and our own lives. Well lived, and now newly ordered. Newly ordered. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be. And our closing hymn is in your order